Hey, so this is going to be my video on Linux. Not everyone's used Linux, so I'll kind of talk about what it is. So, Linux is pretty much a kernel, and operating systems or distros are built on that kernel. So, kind of the idea is you have the system call interface to call the kernel to do all the memory stuff and all the scheduling and stuff like that, some of the under the hood parts of the operating system. But anyways, so there are distros that are like, just like Windows and Mac, you have some Linux distros like Ubuntu, for example, which is probably one of the most popular, where you can install free software. They are starting to get some corporate software, well, I guess pay for software that people pay for in the store, but I don't think anyone really buys it. But it's largely all free. And the cool thing is you have package management. So I can just grab an application by going into the terminal and typing sudo apt tag get install, and then whatever I want to install. So I can install like Firefox or Chromium or Cheese, which is their video software that I'm using, their recording software that I'm using now. When I first started, I've been using Linux for about 7 years, so I think about 7 years anyways. I think I got my first Compact Armada M700 in high school, freshman year. It may have been my sophomore year, or it may have been 8th grade. Anyways, in that range from like 8th grade to sophomore, I got my first computer, loaded Ubuntu. It was pretty buggy. Well, yeah, some of the stuff crashed once in a while, and some software is still like that. But a lot of that stuff was kind of just in development, so can't expect that from in development software. The thing about Linux is like it's not corporately licensed, so they'll just push it up when they feel like it's decent. There's no like, oh, we're gonna have huge user lashback and they're not gonna pay us, so we need to wait until we actually have a relatively decent release cycle. You just throw it up when you feel like it's good enough for other people to use. So it can crash and do some of those things, and you have it spread out between different distros, so things are kind of different between different distros as well, so it's hard to make up for all those changes. Anyways, I'm largely happy with it. I really like the terminal. I like how Vim's on there. You have Bash. Some people use other shells. I like most of the defaults. I use GNOME 3 as my desktop environment. So with Linux, you can have different desktop environments, which is kind of unheard of in other operating systems, as far as I know, as far as the main commercial ones like Mac and Windows. So I have GNOME 3, which is a desktop environment. It's kind of how you interact with the front-end user interface. So you have like on Windows, you have that start bar, or I guess on Windows 8 you have the new like Metro UI type of thing. So with Linux, like you could have like a core like of Windows. It's actually like the Linux, but anyways, like say Windows is structured like Linux, you would be able to trade out the Windows 8 desktop environment with like the Metro UI and all of that, and the Windows 7 UI where you have the start bar, and that'd be the desktop environment. So one thing that's kind of cool is I use GNOME 3, so one cool feature is you can just press the Windows key and it'll kind of zoom out of all your software, and then you have virtual workspaces on the right side, so you can choose exactly which virtual workspace. Instead of having like a taskbar, you can just throw things on those virtual workspaces, which dynamically allocate, so you have it just appends dynamically. Like I'm just throwing apps in there right now as we speak, and it's fine. And I think it's a good way to access your applications. Some people like they don't like stacking Windows managers, so they use tiling. So instead of having stuff where you can like move the window around, they'll have places where it just generates these tiles, so it can be like vertical. So there could be like one over here and one over here. Then when they bring a third one, it can have one up there and one down there and one to the other side. And then they can just have a hotkey to swap between them. So there's multiple ways to interface with Linux. I think predominantly Linux predominantly wins with the terminal because the Linux terminal is awesome because you can install software, you can uninstall software, you can go into the configuration files for servers and stuff like that because you have Apache and which is a web server, so you can just configure Apache through the etc portion on the file system. So then you can just configure that how you want. You can add users, remove users, do a lot of easy stuff. Like, I don't know. And then if you want to move files around, I just use SSH. SSH is awesome. You just install OpenSSH, and then you have SFTP and SSH, so you can SSH into the computer and then manipulate files where you want them to be or do whatever you want. Install software, remove it, administrate a server, do configuration for users, passwords, like whatever you can think of. And I really like Vim. So Vim, I think I already talked about it, but it's a command line text editor. So one thing that's cool is like I can just go into find a file on the terminal and then Vim into it and then make changes easy. And they have a lot of cool hotkeys. So kind of the idea with Vim is like you have insert mode and then you have command mode. So command mode, you can do things like write out the file and some of those things. And then also you can like move it different ways. So you can press like W and that'll go to the next word, or E to the end of the word, and you can press like DE and that'll just delete to the end of one of the words. So when you're programming, it's really nice. That's one thing that's pretty nice about Linux. It's really easy to get like GCC, so if you want to start writing C code, G++ if you want to write C++, Perl, Python. If you want to just install those, it's just apt getaway. Or if you're using a different distro, like something like Arch or something, you can just use Pacman to install those things easily. And a lot of distros have Python by default. So Python is one of my favorite scripting languages. It's the first language I ever learned, so I've used that at work a little bit. Anyways, so I have done stuff at work using Linux. So one thing we had is they wanted me to parse out the CSV file, grab some data, and then email it out. So I just used Perl, and I don't remember if I used regex or not. But anyways, there's like this jar file that generated that CSV, and it seemed like it was screwed up. So I rewrote the jar file, which was pretty cool because I got to use some of the messaging stuff like JMS in Java. So I ended up using JMS to interface with their ENA system, which is their emailing system, and then I encoded the data that I wanted in a 64-base system inside an XML to send over JMS to their emailing system, which will email the right person. And then it also grabbed I had like this hash table set up, so then I could grab certain values, like how many times occurrences that things existed. So it worked out pretty well. But anyways, I was on Linux. It was pretty good use. And the cool thing is you have stuff like cron. So if you need to schedule things like that for work, you can do scheduling tasks. So I don't know. Everything in Linux seems pretty functional. I have my drivers. All that stuff works right out the gate. Like right now, I didn't really have to even install anything anymore to get the recording to work. You want to do editing, it works fine. Email works fine. They've got multiple clients, and they seem great. Movies and video, you do have to install codecs, at least in Ubuntu. But there's an option to install at the beginning. So install those codecs so you don't have to worry about Flash, and then you don't have to worry about MP3 and MP4 files playing, which I don't think you normally have to worry about those things in Windows, but in Linux it's a little different because of licensing or something like that. So now you can pretty much install those really easily by on the install just putting a check mark in and then being install, and then it'll update and throw all the restricted extras and all that cool stuff in Adobe. So I think Flash is pretty good now. I really have no problems with Linux, unless you're doing gaming, which they do have Steam and stuff, and people tell you they have Wine and What's the other one? Play on Linux, which is like configurations for line. Um, if you're really into gaming, just have a dual boot. The reason I would recommend using Linux over Windows is largely because of antivirus and customizability. So with Windows, you seem like you get a lot of viruses. You have to pay for a lot of things like virus protection, spamware. Linux, I've never really had to worry about any of that. I just throw Linux on my box and don't even worry about it. With Windows, it's like, gotta install AVG, sometimes it'll slow down the system or whatever. Linux, that's one thing that I think is awesome too, is the speed. So I think it's a lot faster in a lot of regards. Anyways, I think I kind of commented a lot. Well, I'll say another thing too. I have a terminal right over there on my other monitor, and it also has like color codes, which I think you can do in Windows. But that's one thing too that I like is when I do like an ls, I'll list contents out of a directory in terminal. Is executable files will be a certain color, packaged files will be a certain color, media files will be different colors. So I have like the internet's own boy, the HD version, and it's like pink, and then I have a WAV file under it called like voicemail. Because someone left me a voicemail over Google Voice and I downloaded it because I'm too cheap for a phone. And then I have like Skype, the Debian file, and it's red, so it's really easy to see. And I really like that feature, and I don't think I get that in Windows. And there's the GNU tools, which I think I may have said some things about grepinaq, but grepinaq, what they are is their way to parse out output. So say you parsed out a file, you're like catting out a file, which means you say cat in this file, or a file, and then it'll just output the contents. And you can say multiple files, so you can say cat, this file, this file, this file, and then it'll just cat the contents of all of them. And so just print off the first one, then print off the second one, all in one block. So if you want to parse data, like you can use the setnock type of stuff, and then grab the data that you want. Or just see it. A lot of times, one thing I'll do is I'll look at the history, like maybe the history of my commands or something, and then I'll say like grep and then something, so then I can find like what command I was looking for, because sometimes I forgot a command that I was using or something like that, and I can just grep the history with a keyword, which is pretty cool. Anyways, that's kind of my commentary on Linux. I don't know, I kind of talked about desktop environments, I talked about the color coding in the terminal, some of the cool things about the terminal. Pretty much all the software works. You can do basic video editing. I mean, it's not like, it seems like Adobe has some really good products. But you have GIMP, which is an alternative to Photoshop. I think it's great. So anytime that I want to do some basic editing, I'll just use GIMP, and it seems to work fine. Screen recording, I use Kazam now. I have had problems with GTK recording my desktop. For sometimes it worked fine, and then like other times it just stopped working. So, but Kazam, it seems like last time I used it, it was solid. And it seems like as they update the operating system, it gets better in a lot of occasions. So hopefully it keeps progressing, and I'm a fan. I use it. Works great. Works fast. Don't have to worry about viruses. It's customizable, so I can use GNOME 3. I hate Unity. Don't even put me on a Unity box. I probably honestly would rather run Mac or Windows at that point. Actually, probably not, because then I just whip out a terminal and then get my shit done. Anyways, so that's kind of my rant on Linux, I guess.